Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Tech Infi Wire channel. You know all those crazy images and videos we've all been seeing of wildfires ripping through California?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, today we're going to take a deep dive into those January 2025 wildfires
Sounds good.
and try to figure out what's really going on. What caused this? What does it all mean? And what can we learn from it?
Definitely some important questions there.
To help us unpack all of this, we have an expert joining us today who is amazing at seeing the big picture and connecting the dots.
Happy to be here. I think when we look at these huge events, it's easy to kind of get lost in just how big it is. But I think it's important to take a step back
Yeah, I agree.
and really try to understand, the causes behind it and the stories of the people who have been affected. And ultimately, what are the lessons we can learn moving forward?
I'm with you. We're using a great article as our guide today. It's from LearnXYZ, and it's called California Wildfires 2025 Southern California's Devastation.
Oh, yeah, I know that article.
It's got a ton of information, and it's available over on their website, LearnXYZ-In.
A great resource.
Let's start with some of the basics. These fires started on January 7th, 2025, and as of today, January 20th, they're still burning.
Wow, so they've been going on for almost 2 weeks now.
Yeah, crazy, right? And they're mostly hitting Southern California the hardest, with places like Los Angeles, Riverside, San Bernardino, and Ventura counties all getting hit really bad. What is it about these areas that make them so susceptible to these huge wildfires?
Well, you've got a few factors here, and they all kind of come together to create what some people call a perfect storm.
Oh, wow.
But it's really more than just bad luck. First off, you've got those Santa Ana winds.
Oh, right.
Imagine these super hot, dry winds blasting down from the mountains and just whipping up any little spark or ember into a huge fire.
Makes sense.
And then you add in the drought that California's been going through for such a long time now.
Yeah.
And the vegetation is just so incredibly dry that it's like ready to go up in flames at any moment.
It's scary to think about.
It really is.
And then on top of all of that, you add in climate change.
Oh, yeah, definitely a major factor.
Which is kind of like throwing gasoline on a fire that's already burning, right?
Exactly. Climate change basically makes all those other things we just talked about even worse.
Yeah.
The winds get stronger, the droughts get more intense, and the temperatures just keep going up. In fact, the article mentions that this January was the hottest January on record for California.
Wow, that's insane.
Yeah, so you're basically creating this feedback loop where climate change is just fueling these increasingly huge and dangerous wildfires.
Okay, so we've talked about what's causing these fires and where they're happening, but now let's talk about the people.
Sure.
The article says that at least 27 people have died in these fires.
Oh, wow, it's awful.
And another 22 have been injured.
So sad.
And over 205,000 people have had to evacuate from their homes. That's like a whole city. That's the biggest evacuation they've had to do since 2017.
Can you imagine the stress and the fear that those families are going through?
I can't even imagine it. Heartbreaking to think about.
It is. And we also have to remember all the first responders out there, the firefighters, the police officers, all the volunteers.
They're heroes.
Who are putting their lives on the line to try to help people. It's really amazing to see that kind of courage and compassion, even in the middle of all this tragedy.
Yeah, absolutely. And on top of all the human suffering, there's the economic impact too. The article says that over 17,021 structures have been destroyed or damaged.
Wow.
And they're estimating the total cost of all this damage will be over $30 billion.
That's just an incredible amount of money.
It's one of the most expensive wildfire seasons California has ever seen.
Yeah, and the crazy thing is the costs don't stop there. I mean, you've got businesses that have had to close down.
Right.
You've got healthcare systems that are being stretched to their limits. And then there's the mental health toll on all the people who have lost everything. It's like this ripple effect that goes on for years and years.
The article also highlights a few specific fires. One that really caught my eye is the Palisades Fire, which is burning in LA County. It's the biggest fire of 2025, burning over 23,713 acres. That's huge. What does a fire that big do to the ecosystem? Does everything just grow back eventually?
It's not quite that simple, unfortunately. When you have a fire that big, it doesn't just burn up the trees and plants. It changes everything. The soil, the water, the whole web of life that makes up that ecosystem gets damaged. And it takes a really long time for things to recover.
So even after the fire is put out, the effects are still felt for years to come.
Exactly.
What about the animals that live in those areas? The article mentions that some endangered species are being affected by these fires too.
Oh, yeah, that's one of the most heartbreaking things about these fires. They can be devastating for animals, especially those that are already struggling to survive.
Right.
Like, for example, the California condor, which is a critically endangered bird.
I've heard of those.
Yeah, well, these fires are destroying their habitat, which makes it even harder for them to recover as a species.
That's awful. The article mentioned another fire, the Eaton Fire, that was spreading incredibly fast, something like 500 acres an hour. It's hard to even imagine something moving that quickly. What causes a fire to spread that fast?
Well, a lot of it has to do with those Santa Ana winds we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
You know, those winds can whip through canyons and push the flames ahead of them, and then you add in how dry everything is.
Yeah.
And it creates almost like a chain reaction where the fire just explodes in size.
It's like a perfect storm of terrible conditions coming together. And speaking of conditions, I can't imagine the air quality is very good with all that smoke.
Yeah, it can get really bad. The smoke from these fires can travel for hundreds or even thousands of miles, and it can affect air quality far beyond where the fires are actually burning. The article even says that the air quality got really bad in Nevada and Arizona because of these fires.
Wow, so these fires have far-reaching impacts. That's a good point, and we're going to talk about that more in a bit when we get to the climate change part of our discussion. But before we go there, I want to remind everyone about the fantastic resource we're using for today's deep dive, LearnXYZ. They've got tons of great information on all kinds of topics, and you can find them at LearnXYZ-In.
Yeah, it's a great website. They've got articles on everything.
Okay, so let's get back to the California wildfires and try to figure out what's causing them.
Okay, so we've been talking about all these immediate effects of these fires, the damage they're causing, the people they're displacing.
It's a lot to take in.
But we have to sort of zoom out for a second and ask ourselves, like, why is this happening? You know, what are the root causes here?
Right. So the article mentions a lot of factors. They talk about the dry weather, those powerful Santa Ana winds, and then, of course, there's always human activities like, accidentally starting fires, or even just building homes in areas that are prone to wildfires. Yeah. But honestly, it feels like the big elephant in the room here is climate change, right?
It absolutely is. I mean, think about it. All of those factors you just mentioned, those aren't new things in California.
Right.
I mean, California has always had dry periods. They've always had those crazy Santa Ana winds. Yeah. And people have been living in California and impacting the environment for a long time. But the thing is, what's changed is the baseline. Like, climate change is basically turning up the heat on the entire system.
Okay, so I get that it's getting hotter, but how does that translate into more wildfires? Like, how does a hotter planet lead to more fires?
Well, think about it like this. When temperatures go up, more water evaporates. So the soil dries out faster, the plants and trees get all dried up and crispy,
right?
And it all becomes like, kindling, ready to go up in flames with just the smallest spark. Right. And here's something that's kind of counterintuitive. Hotter air can actually hold more moisture.
Really? So wouldn't that mean more rain?
Well, you would think so, right? But the problem is that extra moisture in the air actually gets pulled out of the ground, so it actually ends up making the droughts even worse.
Oh, wow, that's weird.
Yeah, it's kind of a double whammy.
And then when it does rain, I'm guessing it comes down harder and faster.
You got it.
Making it even harder for the ground to actually absorb the water.
Exactly. Instead of soaking into the soil, the water just runs off, causing erosion and not really helping with the drought at all.
It's like a vicious cycle.
It really is. And this pattern isn't just happening in California. The article talks about how wildfires are becoming more frequent and intense all over the planet.
It's a global problem.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And climate change is a major driver of that trend. So yeah, it's definitely something that we need to be paying attention to.
Yeah, for sure. So what can we actually do about it? I mean, is it all just doom and gloom, or are there things that we can do to prevent these disasters?
I think there's always hope. First and foremost, we have to address climate change. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's the root of the problem. And that means reducing greenhouse gas emissions globally, transitioning to cleaner energy sources, adopting more sustainable practices. Like, it's a big systemic change that we need.
Yeah. So that's the big picture stuff. But what about on a smaller scale? Like, what can we do in places like California that are already prone to wildfires.
Well, there are things we can do there too, like the article mentions land management practices.
Yeah.
That's super important. We need to be smarter about how we manage our forests and wildlands. Clearing out the underbrush, creating fire breaks, even using controlled burns to reduce the amount of fuel that's available for wildfires.
That's like preventative medicine for the forest.
Exactly. And then there are things like building codes. If we're going to have people living in areas that are prone to wildfires,
Yeah.
we need to make sure that the homes are built in a way that makes them more resistant to fire. Using fire-resistant materials, creating defensible spaces around the homes.
So making it harder for the fire to actually reach the homes? Okay, that makes sense. And then, of course, there's the actual firefighting itself. The article talks about how there are over 10,000 firefighters battling these California wildfires right now. And they're using all kinds of equipment, like aircraft and bulldozers and all that.
Yeah.
Are there ways we can improve our firefighting efforts? Like, can we get better at putting these fires out?
I think there's always room for improvement, yeah. Investing in new technologies like better early detection systems, more effective firefighting equipment, and even using AI and computer modeling to predict how fires will behave. All of those things can help us get better at fighting these fires.
Okay, so it sounds like there's no one single solution. It's going to take a lot of different approaches working together.
Absolutely. We need to address climate change, we need to improve land management practices, we need to build smarter, and we need to keep getting better at firefighting.
And all of that requires cooperation, right? Like, it's going to take governments, communities, and individuals all working together.
You got it. It's a huge challenge for sure. But I don't think it's impossible. I think if we work together, we can definitely make progress.
I like that optimistic outlook.
Yeah.
And even in the middle of all this devastation, there are stories of hope and resilience, right? The article talks about communities coming together, helping each other out, and raising money for relief efforts.
Yeah, that's what really gets me. Even in the face of such incredible loss, you see people stepping up, helping their neighbors, donating their time and money. It's a reminder that even in the darkest of times, people can still be amazing.
That's inspiring. So it sounds like we need to take action to prevent future disasters.
For sure.
But also hold on to that sense of hope and resilience.
Absolutely. We can't let this get us down. We need to learn from what's happened, take action to make things better, and keep believing that we can build a better future.
Before we wrap things up, I want to remind everybody about LearnXYZ, the amazing resource we're using for this deep dive today.
Definitely check them out.
They have tons of great info on all sorts of topics, and you can find them online at LearnXYZ-In.
Yeah, if you're interested in learning more about this stuff, that's the place to go.
All right, so let's move on to our final thoughts on these California wildfires and what it all means.
It's amazing to see, even with all this terrible destruction and loss, how resilient people can be.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like the article talks about how communities have come together and they've already raised over $100 million in relief funds.
Wow, that's incredible.
In just 2 weeks. It's really heartwarming to see people helping each other out like that.
It really is. It shows you, the power of community and how people can come together in times of crisis. It gives you hope, that even when things seem really bad, we can still find a way to support each other and rebuild.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a good reminder that we're not alone in this.
Yeah.
We all have each other, and that's a powerful thing.
So as we kind of wrap up this deep dive, what's the one big takeaway that you hope our listeners will walk away with?
For me, it's that we're living in a world where these kinds of massive wildfires are becoming more and more common.
Yeah.
And climate change is a big part of that. This isn't just a California problem.
Right.
It's a global problem that we all need to be paying attention to.
It's a wake-up call, for sure. We have to take this seriously.
We do, but even though it's a serious issue, there's still hope. Just look at the resilience of those communities that have been affected by these fires. They're rebuilding their lives.
Right.
They're supporting each other. It's a reminder that humans are adaptable and we can find ways to overcome even the toughest challenges.
It's inspiring. So we've talked about what causes these fires and how devastating they are. And we've touched on some of the things we can do to prevent them in the future. But the big question that I keep coming back to is, are we doing enough? Are we really taking this seriously enough? And are we, each doing our part to protect the environment?
Those are really important questions, and they're not easy to answer. The choices that we make today, both individually and collectively, will determine what the future looks like. So, yeah, we all have to ask ourselves those questions and then do what we can to make a difference.
This has been a really insightful discussion. Thanks for joining me today and sharing your expertise.
It was my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And to all of you listening out there, thank you so much for tuning in to the Tech Infi Wired channel. We hope you found this deep dive into the California wildfires informative and thought-provoking. If you want to learn more about this topic or explore tons of other fascinating subjects, we highly recommend checking out LearnXYZ. You can find them online at LearnXYZ-In. And while you're there, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into the topics that matter most. Thanks again for listening.